Hey everyone, welcome back to Iesha Speaks Truth. Today we're going to be diving into the education system here in America. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this one. I will be having a special guest with me today. His name is Geno Young. He has a book that he wrote, and it's called Sex, Drugs, and Illiteracy, The Death of Education in America. Now, before I bring on our guest, I want to say that at the federal level, Donald Trump has done a lot. We saw the dismantling of the Department of Education. We also saw school choice being reestablished, and the presidential fitness test also coming back into play. And so those things that he has done at the federal level, I think sets a precedent for us to run and like never before. But we need to understand what's taking place within our school system in order for us to fix what's taking place and deep dive into that with people that have actual real grassroots experience with the situation. So this book by Geno Young, it's kind of like a whistleblower style memoir arguing that America's education crisis is not just about test scores. It is also about collapsing standards, broken discipline, administrative incentives, and cultural decay inside schools. And what makes this conversation so important is that this isn't about theory. This is a real person who walked into a real school and saw what's actually happening behind the scenes. Geno is a Chicago native. He spent a year as a substitute teacher in the Chicagoland school system, and what he experienced actually shocked him enough to write this book that we're going to discuss. So this is his firsthand account, not policy theory, not statistics, but lived experience. So this is not someone sitting outside the system criticizing it. This is someone who stepped inside and said something is seriously wrong and we need to fix it. The book centers around a suburban Chicago area school, Hillcrest High School, located in Country Club Hills, Illinois. It's suburbs of Chicago. Geno describes it as a school with a notorious reputation and long-term mismanagement. So this isn't just an inner city stereotype conversation. This is about what happens when dysfunction spreads beyond the city and into the broader system. So according to Geno's firsthand experience, the book highlights classroom chaos and lack of discipline, students far below grade level literacy. I've seen this myself in our school systems here in South Carolina. Teachers and administrators who are checked out or protected by the system, administrative pressures to ignore problems instead of fixing them, and a breakdown of accountability across the board. So what he's describing is not just struggling schools, but a system that, in his view, is actually enabling failure instead of correcting it. So before I introduce my guest today, I also want to bring to your attention that he was also just featured on Lord Trump's podcast last week to discuss the very book that we're going to be talking about today. So Geno Young, thank you so much for being with me. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to dive into this book with you and just discuss your experiences. So first, I want to give our audience a little bit of background about yourself and kind of go through a little bit how you even got involved in the as a substitute teacher. So can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I actually was privileged not to go to Chicago public schools because my parents didn't want me in that environment. And I always sort of, I knew why, but you never know until you know. So when I finally started to work into the system, I said, okay, I get it now. I understand why they didn't want me. I'm a product of that system. So I grew up on the south side. I went to St. Albee School, went to St. Xavier University, and I studied music education and political science. And when I left there, when I turned 25, I ran for Congress here on the South Side. I was the youngest federal candidate statewide, one of the youngest anywhere in the nation. And I got almost 20% of the Republican primary vote first time around. No exposure, really just grassroots. So I did that, and it was very rewarding. I met a lot of great people, and I met a lot of bad people, but I mean, that's politics, so it is what it is. So I did that. And then after that, sort of in the interim, in those years that passed right after that, I sort of wanted to see what the education system was like because my mother worked in education. And, it was Joe Biden's America, and I needed to make a little bit of extra money. So I thought, hey, why don't I give it a shot? It can't be that bad, right? And when I tell you it was worse than my wildest imagination, I can't emphasize that enough. I honestly wouldn't wish what I went through on my worst enemy. It was just that bad. And what I saw was so horrific that it gave me the impetus to write this book.
Wow. And so you got into the school system as substitute teacher. How did you end up at Hillcrest, right? Because there are other options that you could have,
Mhm.
position yourself to take on. So how did that unfold?
Okay, well, I ended up there because just to go back a little bit, my mother actually worked at that school previously in like 2017 and 18. She worked there until she was carjacked there actually. She was carjacked at gunpoint. And a individual, a young man, 17 years old, stole my grandfather's car that he left for her. And luckily, we found it about a week later. But and he didn't do too much damage to it. He busted up the bumper. But she worked there until that incident happened. Then she left, so she moved to a different district. But we tried to go into other districts, but we never heard back from any of them. There was always like a runaround. The district offices were really messy. They would lie to you. They would, send you this place, send you that place, and we felt like we were just getting brushed off. So we actually the only place that was accepting and wanted to bring us in and was calling like crazy to get us. And when I say us, I'm talking about myself and my brother because he also worked in that system. The only school that was, adamant trying to get help was Hillcrest High School in the system that we entered, which was the Bremen 228 public school system out in the south suburbs. So we could have worked in CPS, but we heard horror stories. So we didn't want to work in the city. So we thought, we'll work in the suburbs and it'll be better. But when I tell you it was the same thing, birds of a feather, I cannot emphasize that enough. Because from a demographic standpoint, when they destroyed the infamous Chicago projects. I'm talking about Cabrini Green, Robert Taylor Homes, and Allgill Gardens. When those were destroyed, they relocated those people who were in the city. They relocated all of them out to the south suburbs. So there was an entire demographic change that occurred within the last 15 to 20 years that we weren't privy to. So when we got out there, what we found were we were dealing with kids that were akin to city kids. I mean, these were essentially project kids just taken from one location to the next location, raised by the same parents that grew up in those areas, and unfortunately did not instill better values. That's why those areas out there, Country Club Hills, Dalton, Illinois, Markham, Illinois, Harvey, that's why those areas have gone down so much in the last 20 or 25 years because they imported new individuals and the neighborhoods have changed. But I said all that to say when we got out there, it was like culture shock. It was like, oh my God, this isn't the Country Club Hills I knew of when we would visit when we were coming up, as little kids. So, but that's how we got out there because they were really the only ones looking for work and they were the only ones offering us a steady 5 day workload.
So first off, what I heard you say was that you kind of saw the dysfunction right at the top. As soon as you started to apply for the position, you saw a lot. You said it was very messy, even
Oh yeah.
so. Like I'm just trying to put all of it together. I'm like, dang, right at the very onset of you trying to get into the door, it's that messy.
Oh yeah.
Um,
It yeah, it was like a harbinger of what was to come. I mean, it was like they were sending us every warning sign before we could even step one foot in the door. It was like every bell and whistle was going off.
wow. Okay, so now you're at Hillcrest. I read the book, guys. I have the book on Kindle. You
Mhm.
can you Let's go ahead. Let me put up the book right now, and if we can put that up, you can get it two places. It's on Amazon. You can get it two options, two methods. You can have it as in Kindle, or you can get the paperback copy as well. I have it on Kindle, so I'm just reading it on my phone. But it's a really good book. So in the book, you mentioned that you had the goal of getting some extra income in for a specific thing you wanted to do, and that was the goal. So it wasn't like a long-term thing that you wanted to do. It was like a temporary thing to get a means to an end. And then you started to see all the stuff that were taking place. So can you talk about I guess I'll get to this question, and then maybe this will help you unfold what I want you to get to. What made you decide I need to write this book?
Okay, well, what made me decide that I wanted to write this book honestly was a friend of mine when I just would vent and tell him my stories, and he said, this all of this sounds like a pretty good book. And I was like, you got to be out of your mind. Me write a book, I just couldn't imagine. But then I started to think about it, and I realized that I was essentially journaling. I was writing down mentally in my head what was going on, and I started to put pen to paper. The next thing I knew, I had a 50 pages, I had 80 pages, and then I had 100, 200 pages. But if there was one incident that really gave me the impetus to write this book, that said to me, you have to write this down, it's the fact that I actually received a death threat when I worked there. From one of the students, I asked her to have some decorum in the classroom and stop, slap fighting with another girl, and she decided to turn around and start swearing at me. So I called for security to have her removed from the room, and she thought that it was a good idea then to accost me and tell me that she was going to have her grandfather and her brother come up to the school and quote f me up. So I took the death threat very seriously, and I took it seriously because two people have been murdered at the school on school grounds in the last 2 years. One was a student outside of a football game. He was a freshman, and that was widely covered in the media here in Chicago. Another well, I think was the end of 2024, was a parent that was killed right after a basketball game, and that one did not get as much coverage. It was covered, but not nearly as extensively as was the boy who was killed. So I knew these incidents. I knew that there was gang affiliation. There were these different things that were occurring at the school. So I didn't want to take any risks. So I said, you know what? The police department, Country Club Hills Police, is literally next door to the school. I'm going over and I'm filing a
Wow.
police report. And I told them that, and they didn't like that. Now, that wasn't the entire reason they decided to get rid of me. They got rid of me because the girl, when she attacked me, after that, we had an exchange of words, and I guess they didn't like what I said to her. So they took that and paired it with the fact that I was going to report the incident, and they just used that as a means to oust me. So that was really what gave me the impetus to write the book. And then before that, I witnessed a myriad of perversions that were happening in the school, and we can get to that later on if you want. But I just saw, like, honestly, there was a sex act that occurred in my classroom that I document in grave detail in the book, and that's probably the one thing that I saw that was like, you know what, people need to know what's going on. Parents need to know just how bad these schools are, because you hear about critical race theory, you hear about different LGBTQ agendas being pushed in these schools, but there are things happening internally that you just don't know about until you're in that situation. So I thought that parents needed to hear about that. So that's why I wrote the book.
Wow, I can't imagine that happening like in a classroom setting. It's like no shame. And that tells you that how the atmosphere is at that school. And what I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about too, because in the book you also mentioned that there were the administration there and the teachers. When you called for help, and removing that student, did you, or anytime you had to do that, did you see a constant authority, consistent authority there being taken so that these kids know that if they, act a certain way, they have to face these consequences?
Absolutely not. There were absolutely no consequences at all. None whatsoever. They would send down, the most they would do is send down security, and then the security would extract the student from the classroom. They would put them into a room, I guess we could call it like the reset room or something like that, where they would just sit there until the end of that period and then go on to their other class. But it was a revolving door, and there was just no discipline, and there was no accountability. And the teachers would pull me to the side and they would whisper, and because they were afraid of the administration. Now, just to show you how screwed up the dynamic was in that school, the teachers were more afraid of the administrators and the deans than the students were, because the teachers would pull me to the side and say, you know what, it's just bad, and we thank you for what you're doing. We thank you that you're documenting all this, but from the top down, these deans and these administrators are not taking it seriously. They aren't following through, and there's no accountability. I had multiple teachers, black and white teachers, pull me to the side and tell me that. So that's what I saw from the top down, was just a lack of discipline and a lack of any modicum of decorum. And when I would try to institute that, I was the problem. And this just wasn't at Hillcrest High School, because I worked at a few high schools in this district. Particularly, if I could speak to Tinley Park High School, which was a predominantly white high school, just 6 minutes away from Hillcrest, which was predominantly black. When I worked at Tinley Park High School, I sort of had a reputation after a while around there with the deans and the administrators, because they were upset because they said, quote unquote, I was creating unnecessary tension in the classroom. I said, excuse me, what do you mean? And they said that, and they called me down to HR. They had me sent to HR and everything. because they said that I was creating unnecessary tension in the classroom and I was rubbing people the wrong way in the dean's office. And I asked the lady who was over HR, I said, "What do you mean? What are you saying?" And she said, "Well, you're a little bit too strict with the kids." I said, "Too strict?" She said,
Wow.
"Yeah, you when you speak to the kids, it's like you want them to act a certain type of way, but you have to understand they're children, and we're trying to mold them, and they aren't adults yet." And she was speaking in all these leftist terms, and it was like someone just opened up a book of crazy social terms and just started just spitting out these platitudes. And she was just saying all these things about how they're just kids and how we have to understand that they're not gonna want to act a certain type of way, and you have to be lenient with them because we were all kids. Things aren't like they were when I was in school. Things aren't like they were when she was in school 30 years before that. So there was no accountability, but I was upset about that and I was perplexed for a long time until I actually had a conversation with my grandmother. And she told me, "You know what, Gino, you know what the issue is? It's not that you weren't doing your job. You were doing your job, but you were forcing them to have to do their job. And
Yeah.
they didn't like that because you, as a teacher, instituting discipline, instituting and stipulating order in an orderless system, you were showing them up. You were making them look bad. And that's something that they just couldn't have." And I bumped heads with the deans in that Tinley Park dean's office. I bumped heads, and I get into it in the book, and I don't have kind things to say about any of them. I bumped heads with the administrator, and it all led up to them actually sending me to HR simply for doing my job and instituting a modicum of decorum, telling the children, "You aren't going to come into my room cursing and speaking like you're on the corner of 79th Street. No, we're going to have some order. We're going to have some class in
Yeah.
this classroom." But they didn't want that.
Yeah. I taught in the school system, not as a substitute. I did teach as a substitute teacher, but it was in a private Christian school, so it was a little different.
Yeah.
But I did go to Title I schools here in South Carolina, and I taught as an abstinence educator for Heritage Community Services, and I loved it. I love their curriculum. They are actually the only curriculum I believe in the United States that's actually approved. It is backed by Christian values, but of course, in order for them to get approved by federal government, it had to be science backed. And so of course, it all goes together. But um, when you bring it to the federal level, they want to see science. So they they have all of their system is backed by science. 98% rate of kids abstaining after having the course, and it's just very empowering, and you encourage the kids, you believe in them. So when I was at these Title I schools, I remember my team, when we would go into these schools and we knew that it was a rough school, one of the things we would do is we would pray, and we were like, okay, God, because we needed to see what we didn't want to become a part of the environment, you know what I mean, like be as
Yes.
apathetic, or not see these kids for who they really are, and not be able to speak into their lives because I see a bad kid who's saying this and doing this. But we came in with authority, like God's authority, like this is who you really are. And in the same, and doing that, also calling out and saying there has to be order. Why? Because that's
Yes.
a biblical thing and it blesses your life. The word of God tells us that if you with your teacher, for example, that if you, not to make their job harder, but to actually, be submitted to authority, unless that authority is doing something it shouldn't be doing. But there is an order, there's a way of doing things. And if you're not implementing that in the classroom, or they're probably not seeing that at home, of course, uh, then we're really not setting them up. And I think, let me know your thoughts on this. I have two questions I want to follow up with you on. Is do you think that these teachers are seeing, because you mentioned they say, oh, it's not how it was in my day. Agreed, it's a different time. However, the principles are always going to be the same. The truths
Yes.
are always going to be the same. So do you think that people hesitate, or teachers, for example, hesitate on exercising that authority, or seeing that the actions that these kids are taking, and them not necessarily upholding to certain standards, or moral standards in the classroom, is that's affecting the next generation in a way that they can't even measure? Or do you think that they just want to be complacent because it's easier to not push back, or it's easier um to just collect a paycheck and be done? Like, what are you seeing? What is the mindset of the teachers?
Honestly, I'm saying a little bit of both. You do have those teachers who are there to collect a paycheck and who don't care, and then you have the teachers that coddle and just treat the children. Now these are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 year olds, and you have teachers treating them like they're in fifth grade, like they're in second grade, speaking to them using terms like, and this is a direct quote, "my sweet little babies." I heard a teacher say that to 18-year olds in the classroom, was talking to them like they were in kindergarten. So you're saying you see a mixed bag, but also you do have those teachers who hold them into account and that wake up every day with a mindset stayed on making sure that these children are actually learning and are actually getting something useful. But I just found from across the board that there is a sense of apathy. There is a sense of a breakdown of standards, and not just standards from an academic standpoint, but also morally. And I told the story and on a podcast I was on the other day about how I was subbing in a Spanish room one day, and the Spanish teacher didn't even leave an assignment, but her room was just adorned with all types of LGBTQ
Wow.
propaganda. I mean, it was all up and down her desk. Her desk was literally graffiterized, if that's a word, just graffitied with bumper stickers of LGBTQ, and there were all these phrases on the wall. And as we know, Spanish is a gendered language, but she
Yes.
had like all these just amorphous LGBTQ terms all around the room. So the children are confused from the onset, and I deal with children who will come into a room and will tell me, "I know you might see Johnny on the paper, but today my name is Mia." I tell the story in my book about my mother who grew up in the 70s and 80s. So she's not used to any of this new stuff, right? All this gender, whatever. So she was still new to subbing at the time. And a boy who she had known as, I think his name was Xavier, he came in the room one day and she was taking attendance and she got down to his name. She said, "Xavier." And he raised his hand and said, "Oh no, it's Tiffany today, Miss Cannon." And she looked up and she said he was in a full dress, full makeup, hair,
Very
eyelashes,
grateful.
nails, everything, and was like fluttering his eyes at her. And the look on her face, she said, was priceless. And the entire room just erupted in laughter because she wasn't used to that. She was literally taken off guard by what she saw. And the classroom just had an uproar at her response. So, it's a breakdown on every single level. And just if I could touch on the spiritual angle that you brought up, because that's actually a huge part of my background that I neglected to mention. I come from a very strong Christian background. My great grandmother founded a church here in Chicago and was the pastor there for over 25 years. I grew up in that church. I was one of the musicians. I would sing and perform and play drums, and my brothers would play keyboard and bass guitar. So we grew up in a very strong Christian background. I have an entire line, coming from a long line of reverends, cousins of reverends, and pastors. So you touched on the spiritual angle, and I met one lady there. It was a substitute. She was an older lady, but she said to me, because I was venting to her one day, I was saying, I just don't understand why these children, view me in this light. Why do they come in the room and think that it's okay to be disrespectful? Why do they come in the room and I can hear chuckling and like they're already just sizing me up? And she said, "You know what it is?" She said, "They can see the light in you, and the light in you terrifies the demons within them." And I thought that was such a powerful statement. I thought that was so deep because when you think about it, there's just this breakdown of morality and spirituality. And these children, when they see a young black male, first of all, there's a caricature or a perception of what a young black male in America is supposed to be, urban America is supposed to be, the way you're supposed to carry yourself, the way you're supposed to speak, even the way you're supposed to wear your hair. And when they see me, particularly the males, and I'm not like that,
Yeah.
there was like it was like an affront to them, and they truly felt challenged and they felt threatened by that. So they acted out and they
Mm.
acted in a way that they shouldn't have because they felt like I guess I was trying to be better than them or something like that. When
Mm.
honestly, I was just holding myself to an esteem and trying to pass that on to them, but they didn't receive it.
I think you hit on something too that I even saw with, my own with my family. I think and it's just a misconception. And like you mentioned, I believe that this is spiritual because that's how my husband and I conquered it. Um, Never in a million years did I think that I would marry a white guy.
Hmm.
It just wasn't on my radar. But when you are a Christian, you don't the Lord doesn't like he doesn't put us in categories like the world does.
No.
And we don't see things like the world does. Like we see it through his eyes, and he loves all of us. He created all of us in different ways. And what I fell in love with my husband was his heart, was his love for God, and his boldness, and the fact that even if you were his close friend, he will tell you the truth. If you know, even if it cut, he loves you enough to tell you that. And that was his character. It was what drew me to him. And my family, even my family, was like really hard for them to accept. Like, wait, because we have my just to give some context, I'm African American, and my granddad is also Puerto Rican. So I also speak Spanish. I spoke it until I was like 9 when I lived with my grandparents, and then we moved out, my mom and I. But so they always said, you know, you can only date a black guy, African American, or you can date Hispanic. So that's what I always grew up. Even after became a Christian, I just that was just in my mind from when I was young. But then my husband comes along. He's amazing. He's a white guy, and he ends up. My family struggled to accept him. They even threatened not to come to my wedding. And what I
Mm.
did to my grandma, who was very important to me, you know, in the Black community, your grandma is like important.
Oh,
So
yes.
I would say to her respectfully, and I told them I was respectful the whole process because I understood the spiritual dynamics. And so I told my grandma, I said, "You will light the unity candle at my wedding," and she goes, "I will not do that." No, I said, "You will light the unity candle at my wedding." And she did. And they love my husband now, like with
Uh-huh.
everything in them. "Are you guys coming to Thanksgiving? Is John coming?" You know, they love him. And he just loved them through that. He never, you know, said anything. And the funny thing is, on his side, his family never viewed me as that. I remember the first time I met his parents, they came to when they came down because they're from Missouri. They came to South Carolina, and he told them he was dating me. And at the time, he told them that he was serious about me, which I didn't know. He, you know, intended to ask me to marry him and all that. They knew. So when I first met them, they ran to the door of my house, and they were like, "Are you Aisha?" And they hugged me. I didn't even know them. They were like hugging me, and I was like, "Oh," and I was like, "That was Aisha." And they're like, "We're so happy to meet you." And they were amazing. I love my in-laws. They are awesome people. They love Jesus. They are awesome. But it was a little struggle for my family. And but now they came around. And even when I did the abstinence education in schools, I had to talk about my relationship with my husband, which with my church family, the way that we operate, and I'm trying to say that without going into so many details, but
Mhm.
the way that we hold standards, the way that we honor the word of God, the way that we wait for marriage, we, you know, those things, it was foreign to the world. It was foreign to people when I got out there and I would talk about my relationship with my husband. And people would be like, "Why?" Even on my TikToks, and I would talk about it. It garnered so many views, and people had so many questions. It wasn't rude or anything, but they were just. I think it was just like, "I haven't heard this. That you do this," you know. So, anyways, when we went to the schools and I would talk to these kids about relationship, because that was a part of the curriculum. When you talk about absence education, there's a part that talks about the type of man you want, because I taught the females. We split them up by male and female. So a male educator would be with the males, 'cause that's appropriate, and then the females would be with the females. And so I would talk to them about the man that they would want and help them to dream, and to like say like, well, what it could cost if you got someone else that was outside of that standard. Not to set unrealistic expectations, but to
Mhm.
understand that you're worthy of love, and you have to be able to become that so you can see it. So like that's the things we talked about. And when I would talk about my husband, they would always ask me, "Can we see a picture of him? Can we see a picture of him?" And because I would give them details about how he treated me and things like that. And every time I showed them, I was like, "Yeah, yeah." I showed them a picture of my husband. They're like, "I knew he was white. I knew it. There's no way." And I was like,
Oh,
it was sad that they would say that, and I
yeah.
get what they're saying. I get it, because you know, if
Mhm.
that's all you've seen in the hood is if rough guys with, you know,
Yep.
mistreating, I get it. But there
Yeah.
are men that are black that actually do the same thing.
Yes.
It's just your environment.
Right, that's all it
So,
is.
and I had to get them to see that, like, you have to come out of this environment, and the only way to do that is people like you and I, for example, people that are willing to show them a different way, because you're in living a different lifestyle. So, and that's the way that they come out of that, is that you got to show them that something else really does exist, and they have
Mhm.
a choice at that point to choose the better thing. So I you saw that, and in your book, I want to get to this too, because you break down at Hillcrest specifically.
Mhm.
You said that there was that dynamic between there being, I believe it was like more white teachers than
Yep.
there were black, right? Can you go into that a little bit, and what you saw as how did that affect the students and the way that those teachers thought?
Sure. So, and that's an excellent question. I noticed early on that a lot of the teachers that were white, not most of, not all of them, but most of them, I would say, were white leftists or white liberals, and these were of the worst kind. The type that Malcolm X spoke about, the type that feel like they have to ingratiate themselves with black people. And in doing so, they actually end up doing much more harm because instead of telling them what they need to know, what they should know, they feel that they have to manipulate and twist language and try to get down on their level just to make themselves acceptable. So down in ARC, which is in the basement of the school, which is where they dump the kids who are the biggest problems, who have done horrific things in the school. For instance, there was a group of kids who shot a sex tape in the school and tried to airdrop it over the
Mm,
airwaves to the entire school during school hours. Luckily, it was that one of the administrators intercepted it before it could go out. But those kids, instead of expelling them or even charging them with some sort of, creating child exploitation material at the school, they just threw them downstairs in ARC. So downstairs in ARC, it's run by a bunch of white leftists, and the way that they behave, I would notice they would do what they call code switching, which is, sort of changing their lingo or changing the way they spoke when they were around these kids. And I noticed they all were using like this southern drawl, but it was like a really really bad accent. Like if anyone's familiar with Hillary Clinton when she ran for president, and she got up in front of the black church and sort of took on like this persona, or even Kamala Harris did the exact same thing when she spoke down in Georgia.
uh,
And they start, jive talking. If you've ever seen like the movie Airplane, and I noticed they were all stepping around there, and they had like this crazy accent. It sounded like they just stepped off of a Louisiana plantation circa 1853. And it was so degrading and so demeaning. And I was like, and the kids thought it was funny. They thought that the teachers were being hip. And I was like, you all are too unintelligent or ignorant to understand that these people are insulting your entire existence right in front of you, and you think there's something to joke about. And I was insulted by it, but that's just the way that the teachers would act. And if they weren't doing that, if they weren't code switching and jive talking with these black kids, they were going out of their way to make things easier for them. They
mm.
were trying to make things easier, and they would either they were giving them Snow White. Now they were in seventh, they were in ninth grade, but they were reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. They were doing coloring books,
Oh
and
my
this is in an
gosh.
English class. They were giving them coloring books and Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and you're a 14-year-old. So it's just ridiculous. But the black teachers, I will say, they were a lot more strict because they understand what's out there, what young urban black children are truly up against. So
Yeah.
they would give them more strict tutelage. And I dealt with one teacher in particular, and I believe she was on her way out retiring, but she was very strict, and she would tell them, okay, we're learning today. Get off your computers, put down the laptops, put down the iPads, take your hoods off, take off the headphones. We're learning today. Like she would go all out and say, we're learning today. And she made them do their work. I had her class. I was fortunate to sub for her several times, but each time she always left an assignment and it was due by the end of the day. And whoever didn't turn it in, it was understood that they were going to take a zero. But she really had a modicum of decorum in her classroom, and she would speak to my brother and I. And she would always tell us, and it's sort of poignant looking back on it, but she would always tell us, you all are too talented for this. Education in America is declining.
Mm.
I've been working here 30 years, and I can tell you that it's definitely on the decline. And with new leadership coming in the coming year, it's only going to get worse. There are too many fields out there that would appreciate young, intelligent, powerful black men. You all need to just get out of education, find something else to do, because as an educator of 30 plus years, I can tell you I've seen the change, and it's not getting any better.
Now you mentioned something in the book too that you keep hitting on as well. Was
Hmm.
that there were teachers that didn't leave assignments for the
Oh yeah.
kids? Can you dive into
Oh
that?
yeah, I can dive into it. So there's a running gag in the book, and I actually haven't spoken about this in a podcast setting, so I'm glad you brought this up. There's a running gag where I talk about room 119. Every time I had that room, now this was a computer lab. Every single time I had that room, it was like there was a demon in that room because the teacher would never leave any assignment, and when she wouldn't leave an assignment, it was chaos. And the kids felt that they could do whatever. They felt that it was a 50-minute free period just to get up act a fool and do whatever they wanted to do. So the teachers, it was a running problem around there that they would not leave work. And it got so bad that during some of the teachers' meetings, substitutes would take time out of their day and go to those meetings and plead with the teachers, please leave some assignments behind, because when you don't, you're putting us in a trick bag, because it's going to be very difficult for us to deal with this class for 45 minutes to an hour if they don't have any assignments left. And some teachers would do it, other ones wouldn't. I would say it was exactly half and half. And the worst possible incident that happened, and I tell this story in every single podcast I do because it's so important. And this is probably the worst story in the book. So I don't want to spoil it, spoil the book, but this is one of the worst stories in the book. I was in room 119 again. This was just a standard day. Most of the class was out on a field trip. And I noticed that a boy and a girl were sitting a little bit too close for comfort. And they were way too close. And I said to myself, okay, let me keep my eye on them. Then, as I went on through the period and I began to look at them some more, I noticed that there was like motion going on. I was like, wait a minute, now that cannot be what I think it is. I know better. So I grab a piece of paper off my desk, I get up and I, play it off like I'm going to throw something away in the garbage. So I go throw the piece of paper away in the garbage. They stop moving. I said, okay, maybe that's just me just being hypersensitive, whatever. So then a couple of more moments pass, and then I notice the boy gets up from the girl's left hand side, goes over to her right. And the next thing I know is I just see motion, like, and I can see the girl's hand just like going up and down, up and down. And I said, oh my God. So, long story short, for those who don't know by now, the girl was giving the boy a hand job in the middle of the classroom, and they were live streaming the sex act over the
Oh my
internet
God.
with my face in the background. So they were creating child exploitation material on school grounds with my face in the background. So I got up and I freaked out. I said, "Where the heck do you think you are?" I went off, and they timed it just right because the bell rang and I couldn't even call down for security to come in and deal with it. So I had to write up a report, run down to the front office, give it to them. About a half hour later, I get summoned to the dean's office, and I go in there and I tell my story. And it's two administrators in there, and one of them is sort of just looking down. The man that's in there is just looking down. And the woman, she looks up at me and she says, "Oh, well, we've never had anything like that happen before." And she had like this really, silly look on her face. And I look over at the man that's standing in the room, the male administrator, and he's just shaking his head looking down because he understood that and remembered that the year prior, children shot an entire sex tape in the basement of the school. So he's like, "Yeah, this, I don't see why you're so surprised. This is the rule around here, not the exception." So that's just one of the things that I witnessed around there. And there was no repercussions, there was no accountability. The school thought that the best way to deal with that was to simply take the girl out of that class, and the boy, they let him go home. They called his mother up to the school and released him 30 minutes before the school day ended. And to my knowledge, they swept it up under the rug. There was never any accountability, no true repercussions whatsoever.
Now, can you see the difference in, or just share with us what you see in the difference when you have a liberal mindset in school and how that actually plays out in behavior and in practicality versus when you have, like, we're Christians and you come in and because the word of God tells us to have vision. So even though, like, for example, I wasn't a teacher, I was an abstinence educator. I came in, depending on if that was a middle school, I came in for 2 weeks. If it was high school, I came in for 1 week. And that's all the time I had with these kids. But since I understood how impactful that time needed to be, I came in with like vision, like I want these kids to get it. I want them to understand. And even when I did substitute for the private school as a Christian, I there's a standard, and I want
Hmm.
them to understand that I'm reinforcing what your parents are teaching you at home. That is my job. And so, and of course the academic part of that too, but in character wise, it's reinforcing what they know to be true. So there's that, right? There's you
Hmm.
mentioned, and I think we both mentioned that moral, the behavioral, the even the leadership. Like my mom, and I'm speaking about she's my pastor as well. I call her my mom, because she almost like raised me. But she she is a woman that raised me to be very excellent in dealing with people. So I have to, like, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to be there. I have to honor that word, and even if I'm super tired and it's very inconvenient. If I'm at a school, I understand that I'm there for a purpose, right? I'm not in Those kids have a purpose. And I understand that what I do and don't do, or what I allow, um, that has consequences, right? These kids, I have to see what they can't see, you know, and believe for them when they can't believe. So
Mhm.
there's that what the Christian brings, and then we took out, you know, praying in school and all that, but there's that aspect of what we bring, which comes with authority. It comes with reason. It comes with common sense. It comes with vision. It comes with logic, and it comes with encouragement and all that of what could be, right? And then there's this what you mentioned is like you mentioned liberal, right?
Mhm.
Mindset. What how can you, I guess my question is, can you break down from your experience the differences between those two and how it affects the environment or even the leadership of a school?
Sure. So, I actually the only experiences I have are the experiences that I had when I was working in these schools, and the only thing I can compare them to, is the Christian private schools that I was fortunate enough to go to. So, as Christians, we stand on eternal truths. The Bible is the bedrock foundation of every single thing that we do. So, we have eternal truths that don't change. Liberals, on the other hand, or leftists, because they aren't very liberal anymore. They're more, you can argue with a liberal, you can talk to a liberal. A leftist is someone that's like slamming your head against the wall. You can't change their mind. And that's what I encountered with a lot of these different people, just all the way down to the dynamic in the break room. They were always looking at CNN, always had on ABC. They were always talking about the president and just speaking in all these disgusting terms. But that's another story. And I get into that in the book. And I had a lot of fun when the election came out the way that it did. I was just smiling and I turn on the View. I said, you know what? Today I think I want to look at the View, and I turn on the View, and we just had fun. My brother and I, and they were all sick, but we had so much fun. But anyhow, Christians, we stand on eternal truths. We have the bedrock foundation, which is the Bible. Leftists, their views are not rooted in anything that's true. So therefore, their views are forever evolving. They're amorphous and they're
Ooh.
very malleable. So, they're always changing what it is. So today it might be LGBTQ today, but tomorrow it's MMI, whatever, LGBTQ, whatever the new term is that they came up with in Canada this week. So they're always changing their values, so they can never really come to an agreement within themselves of what's real and what's not real, because they're always shifting the goalposts to try to outdo to try to I guess you could say, out woke their last leftist their last leftist experiment. But we, on the other hand, as Christians, we understand that there are two genders. We understand that there is truth. There is a thing called truth, and there also is a thing called lies. So we can expose what's real and what's not real, whereas they can't do that. And I think that's probably the most powerful thing that I can remember from when I was coming up in school, was just understanding the fact that I had teachers and I had godly people around me that could tell me what was right and what was wrong. But today, these teachers, even if they feel it in their heart, they feel uncomfortable, or they're frightened or threatened to come out and speak truth, and say what's real and what's not real. They have to validate these children. I tell a story in my book about a kid who, it's a boy who identified as a trans two spirit vampire. Yes, a trans two spirit vampire. And he was bragging one day to my brother about how he would go on Amazon and order this thick red drink like blood, and pretend like he was drinking blood because he was a vampire. So, somewhere along the way, this child got the idea that it was okay, and someone validated him. Someone in that building more than likely validated him and told him, you know what? You are trans. You can be a two spirit. Now you're black. Now, how are you black and a two spirit? I just don't get that, because two spirits are supposed to be Native American, but that's a different story. So you're a black trans two spirit vampire, and guess what? We're gonna run with it. No one's gonna call you out. No one's gonna say no. That's not what God created you to be. So I think that that's sort of the dynamic that I can point to the most, is the fact that when I was coming up, the schools I went through, they acknowledged eternal truths. They acknowledged and they stood on a foundation of morality and of virtue. Whereas nowadays, these schools, you can't even, like you mentioned earlier, they've taken prayer out. Some schools in the South have luckily been able to put back in the Ten Commandments, but there are all types of court cases coming against that now that we're
Oh,
seeing.
wow.
So now, that may go one day, that might go again. So the public school system is just completely screwed up from top to bottom, and there's just a breakdown of all morality and any modicum of decency or tradition, really.
Think that was well stated. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Now,
thank you.
I do want to get into our book club, and then I'm going to finish up with some questions with you, Gino. So this is exactly why I started the book club. This is because we need real conversations, hot, not just surface level talking points. So if you want to go deeper into topics like this, actually read, discuss, and think critically with us. Join my subscriber community where we meet once a month. We're having conversations just like the one we're having right now, but deeper. You'll be able to connect with experts and grassroots warriors like Gino, who will be also joining because we'll be doing his book in a few. And we will also offer discounts on merch, and you'll be able to grow with a healthy community where you can share your thoughts and grow as a Christian conservative in this fair. So if you'd like to join, you should be able to see that information in the show notes. And if not, you can find it on Iesha Speaks Truth on Facebook, depending on where you're watching from. So we're currently with Ina Cyrus. She's an Iranian expert, and her book is Architecture of Jihad. So right now we're focusing on that. And the next time we're going to be meeting is May 13th, 7 to 8 p.m. ET. And then after that, we'll have Geno Young with us. It is a pleasure to have actual people that wrote these books that have the experience to be there to answer questions and to help us to be able to do something about what we're seeing. But first, we need the knowledge of what's happening so we can act. So that gets me into my next question with you, Gino. So before I ask, what do you think could actually fix what we're seeing? I want to ask you this: what were you more shocked by? Was it the adults' behavior or student behavior in school?
I was more shocked by, well, the most shocking thing I ever witnessed was the sex act. I will unequivocally say that. But I will say I was more shocked by the fact that there was no accountability. The fact that the adults who are supposed to be, the standard bearers of the school were very apathetic and couldn't have cared less. They were like, "Oh well, just another day here," and just move on by. And when you try to call it out, you're the issue. Like when I worked at Tinley Park High School, and I tried to call out the fact that children weren't behaving correctly, and I was the problem. I was called a troublemaker. I got sent down to HR, and they were mad at me. The deans were mad at me because I was basically exposing them for not doing their job. So I was more surprised and more shocked by the way that these adults are acting, far more than the children, because children will only go so far. They'll go as far as you let them. But
Mm.
these adults, they actually hold the cards, and these administrators refuse to do the work and they turn a blind eye.
Now, what do you believe? What do you believe the system protects? Why do you believe it protects failure?
I believe that it protects failure because if the failure is exposed, their bottom line becomes exposed as well and becomes vulnerable. I get into numbers in the book, and I'm talking about monetarily now. Just to send a standard child to school in Illinois is approximately $21,000. But if that child is reclassified as special education or AP or an IEP, as they call it, that money then doubles to over $41,000. So these school systems have found ways to game the system, and they realized early on. And I had a teacher actually tell me this, that not only are they putting children into AP classes that don't belong there, they're putting children into special education classes, reclassifying them as special needs so that they can get increased funding from the federal government. And they realize that if they do that, their ratings go higher and their numbers go up. And I also found out from the same teacher that they found out that if they throw out too many kids in these schools, their funding goes down because each child, there's a substantial amount of money attached to each child, which is why they won't throw out these kids.
Mm.
Particularly at Hillcrest, I had a teacher tell me that the school board said they were throwing out quote unquote too many black kids. Now, that's all that really went there. I mean, there was like one lonely white kid and maybe a smattering of Hispanics, but it was predominantly 90, probably about 98% black. But the school board, which is full of a bunch of white leftists, said they were throwing out too many black kids. So it's all a numbers game and it's all about
Mm.
funding, and that's why there's such a breakdown of accountability, and that's why they much rather get rid of or oust a person like me who's exposing it all and holding them to a standard, because as a troublemaker and definitely as someone who was opening my mouth and speaking out, I was then a threat, and anyone who speaks out against it, the situation is a threat. That's why I had teachers coming up to me whispering, and they were afraid to even really talk about it. And they always had to be cognizant of who was around and who was aware, because you have moles in there who will go back and run back and tell the administrators trying to score special credit points with them. They'll rat out anyone in there. anyone who they think they could get a leg up on, they'll rat you out in a second. You know, so that's sort of the dynamic around there. So
You
that's what
mentioned
I
in the
saw.
book that the paycheck of these teachers, they had like six-figure paychecks,
Oh yeah.
administrators.
Hmm. They do. I found it quite interesting that a lot of the administrators, the superintendents, and the teachers, they're making their money. They're making their money hand over fist. So they're not going to do anything to screw that up. And they certainly aren't going to allow someone to come out from the outside to come in and potentially expose things or screw it up for them. And I found it interesting that this coming school year, they're now in some of the districts here in Illinois, they're thinking about allowing the superintendents to have essentially an unlimited line of spending up to $5,000, and they no longer have to report it to the district office. They no longer have to report it to the board. Like there's no accountability at all. So essentially, superintendents are going to have unlimited spending in some of these districts locally here, and they will be unaccountable to anyone.
I hope you guys that are watching, if you're thinking about going to your school board meetings, that you can take from what we're talking about right now and make sure you do your research about where your area is and see what's happening in your school systems. I love what Gino is exposing right now because he's actually giving you guys real details on what to look at and basically following the money trail. It seems like one of the core things that we are missing here. Of course, that lack of leadership, but that probably comes with the fact that they're liberal thinking and that the lack of accountability, like we saw, for example, in Minnesota, um, when it comes to the spending. This is great. So, who is responsible? And then my last question for you, I'm going to leave that to the last question because I think it's a really good question on how we can, move forward. But before that, who is responsible? Do you think is more responsible? I guess to say, schools, parents, culture, or policy, or all? What do you think?
I think your earbuds may have died.
Oh, you could do, I guess you can click on your settings at the top and then switch it to the default setting of your laptop.
I'm texting him right now.
Thank you, Mike. Hold on, guys. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Oh, David Witz has a question too. I will bring that into the conversation, David. And then Jake, I see your comment as well. And I agree with you that it is unfair to those that want to learn. And Timothy Fable, thank you so much for the stars. Okay, I'm checking all the comments on YouTube as well, just making sure I didn't miss anything because last a few times I've missed YouTube comments while we're waiting. So we're gonna have a few more questions, just this one and one more question I'm gonna ask him before we close today's episode, as soon as he is able to get back on. And then I'm gonna bring in David Wood's question as well.
He is
Also,
frozen on my end still.
okay.
Has not replied to the text message.
Okay, he's probably trying to fix it. Well, if you can, are you able to pull up my the your skincare flyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead and do that. So, guys, if you are or have a wife or a significant other who is into skincare and you would like to do something nice for them for Mother's Day, consider this. Your Skincare is a brand that I've been partnered with since 2023. If you guys are unaware of my background, I started my social media as a beauty and fashion creator. So I have a lot of partnership with different brands. That is how I basically make my main income. So this brand I've been working with since 2023, and they make all of their items here in the United States. Everything is natural. You can even use their options when you are pregnant, which I believe says a lot about a brand if you can use it at your most sensitive time in life as a woman. So I use their products, of course. They were the only brand that I used when I was pregnant with my daughter last year because I knew it was safe. And they have great customer service. They ship within 1 to 3 business days. So if you go on the website, you will not be missing anything that Amazon also provides. except the fact that on the website, if you see that the link in the show notes, or if you want to screenshot it and then, type it in, you can do that too. But if you go on the website and you use my code, what that will do is allow you to have free shipping. You'll get free birthday gifts and then also free refills. Their items are amazing. For example, their night cream is one of my favorites. My audience on TikTok loves the night cream. It's an expensive side, but it works. Okay. It's like 70 something dollars. But that night cream will, it'll help with fine lines, wrinkles. It is great hydration, it has squalane in it as well. And this right here, I love the little push little thing that it dispenses the amount that you need, so you're not wasting product. They thought about all of that. So that night cream is a very, very simple thing you can use, and it literally targets like multiple different things in just that one cream. Even it has peptide in it as well, and niacinamide, so that helps with brightening and even in skin texture. So you can, that is one option you can have inside your kit, and you can get a great discount on that. That is one option. They also have both skincare and makeup drops, so that are all clean. So you can check those out. So if you hit the link, you can go to the website and it'll give you those perks along with your purchase. You'll get a discount. If you want to shop on Amazon, you can also do that too. The discount code, I believe, is Iesha15 off, Iesha15 off, and then you can get 15% off of the purchase, okay, on anything that you purchase, whether it's their kit or it's one simple product. So if you would like to check that out for a loved one in your life, then you can. This is both female and male, depending, I guess, on the product that you get, of course. So check those out. I think those would be an awesome gift to give. I love their products. And do we have Geno back?
I believe we have audio, but I'm having issues getting the video in.
Okay. Geno, can you hear?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I just think we don't have your
Okay.
but it's okay.
Okay. Let me. I don't. Yeah, it was okay until like it was like a spam call that came through and it just blew up like everything.
Did
Um,
you come out and come back in?
I did. Maybe I should try that again because it's just black.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you do that, and then if it doesn't work, that's fine. We'll just continue to move on.
Okay, I'll be right.
Okay, cool. All right. So in the meantime, there is another sponsor I want to share with you guys. This one is jacemedical.com. I think we have a flyer or something you can put up. Well, I'm not, but we don't have to do the video, but jacemedical.com is a website where you can go on to get prescribed medications from actual doctors. And this is a way for people that like to have like a stash, and just in case you have those natural disasters or anything happens like that, and you want to make sure that critical medications you need, like for example, insulin, albuterol, etc., you have on hand, and you don't have to wait on FEMA, for example, or a medical doctor to give that to you, prescribe that for you. So this is a way for you to have those medications on hand. Now, what I love about this is the way that they streamline their process. It's very, very easy. If you go to jacemedical.com, make sure you use my code, because that code is going to give you a discount. What you can do is you can go through the website and select the medications that you need. They even have a little kit, and they discounted it already as well, so you can take advantage of that. Select the items that you need. It'll also ask you about any allergies you have, so you stay away from those items. And then it's really easy. You don't have to submit anything for proof necessarily. So if it's simple medications like that. And what they do before sending it out is they will also email you, get in contact with you to make sure that the products you order are correct, that they have your allergies, things that you're allergic to, not a part of the formula of those things. So that way, it's actual doctor that's reaching out to you to confirm those things, which is awesome. And then once that's a go, they send out your product, and you just get everything right there sent to your home. So you never have to leave home. Order it right there online, sent to your home, and now you have a stash, and just in case you need it. So if you want to check them out, you can use the code is Iesha, my name, in lowercase. You can use the code Iesha, Iesha, and that'll give you a discount when you're checking out. It's jacemedical.com. Okay, and we'll wait a little bit. Let's see if Geno gets back in, and then I will ask David Wiz's question, and then we will ask my final question, which is, of course, now that we know all the problems, we need to be the solution. So definitely want to end on that note.
And I
And
believe he
again,
is
guys,
back, but it is audio.
Okay,
So I'm
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't understand really what happened, but
It's okay. All right. So I let's get to David Wiz's question. I have a question from a follower or a listener. He said, would it help to abolish all teachers union?
yes, that would definitely be a huge help. The Chicago Teachers Union, just speaking locally here, 41 they raised $41 million last year, and of that money only about 18% of every single dollar raised went into the education system. The rest of it all went to political pet projects. So the teachers unions do a terrible disservice to the students, and actually the Chicago teachers unions have been under an audit, and they're actually under investigation because for the last 5 years they did not release their audits. So for the last 5 years we didn't know exactly what they were doing with the money, where it was going, or what was happening.
Right.
And it's not until they were put up under public pressure and scrutiny that and court cases, like legal trouble, that they actually released those audits for the last 5 years. And it was so bad that that Congress now is actually involved. And Congress, they want to have a direct inquiry into their finances, into the finances of Chicago Teachers Union. So that was an issue, and one of the biggest problems was that anytime any of the members or any of the courts would raise questions and ask, we want some transparency, let us know what's happening, they would get upset and they would say, they would cry racism. They would say it was a racist dog whistle because the leader of CTU, Stacey Davis Gates, is a black woman. So they were saying, "Oh, you're doing this because she's black," and they tried to do that to shut down speech and shut down any type of
Yeah, they label you. Yeah.
yeah, any type of dissent. They want to shut it down. So they're now going to be under a investigation from Congress, and they actually found that they lied to their members. They said that they were under a continuous audit for the last several years. They lied to the courts, but at the same time they were reporting to the IRS that they were no longer under an audit, that they had completed all of their filing and all of their forms. So they've been caught in a myriad of lies. And to answer the question, the teachers unions are a huge problem here locally, and I'm sure they're a problem everywhere.
David Wiss's question actually goes right into my final question, which was, what would actually fix this realistically? So that's one solution that we have. Do you have any other ways that you think we could go forward with fixing the education system in America?
Yes, so I think that it's multifaceted, but one of the things that I would like to see is the continued work by the Trump administration federally to dismantle the Department of Education. I think that it's got to go. I think that it's done a terrible disservice to our children. I think that when you look at it all the way back pre-COVID and specifically after COVID, when you had Randy Weingarten and American Federation of Teachers working locally with teachers unions like Chicago's teachers unions just to keep the schools closed, and you had teachers saying that they weren't going to go back into the schools unless they had a laundry list of demands, and they were on beaches in Aruba, they were in Egypt, they were in Hawaii, they were down in Cancun, they were everywhere you could imagine but in the schools. So they obviously don't have the children's best interests at heart. So I do believe that in that regard that the teachers unions need to be held into account, and also that the Department of Education needs to go. And also from the state and local level, one of the things I would like to see more stringent truancy laws placed into these schools that hold the parents accountable for not making sure that their children show up to school. Because as I always say, there's a direct correlation between the kid that's out there, a 16-year-old knocking a
Right.
grandmother in her head, stealing her purse at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the same 16-year-old who's chronically absent every single Friday, who's missing from my math class. So I think that there's a direct correlation there. And if we start putting in some stringent policies on these parents, holding them accountable, and also holding their welfare benefits into holding their welfare benefits and saying to them, you know what, if your child doesn't show up for school, you aren't getting your check this week. That's been tried in New York, it's been tried in Michigan, it's been tried in Tennessee, and it works. It was taken away in those states, but it does work. If these parents start to be held accountable, and they know that if they don't send their children to school and they don't step into that role as a parent, they won't be getting their government assistance that week. I promise you, you could fill a stadium with the amount of children that would be sitting in these classrooms.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to just, if I can add to it, I think all of us as well, making sure that we are aware when our next school board meetings and our city council meetings are, all those local level meetings that we need to participate in so we can vote and make sure that what's happening at the federal level is something that we're implementing in the local. Geno, thank you so much for your time and for breaking all this down, for giving us the insight that we need so we can actually make change in certain in the areas of education. And I do look forward to having you a part of the book club so we can go a little bit deeper and you guys can ask your questions there. So if you have not subscribed, guys, make sure that you do that. Make sure you go ahead and get Geno's book too, because that's what will be necessarily the driving force to give you more context, because he goes deep into that in his book about the issues in our education system. And as you can see, it wasn't just one school. He broke down a couple of different schools within the Chicago area that he actually had firsthand experience with. And me being in South Carolina, I've seen the exact same thing. So the book is amazing. If we can put yeah, thank you. So the book is Sex, Drugs, and Illiteracy. You can get it on Amazon. You can either do the Kindle version or you can do the hardback copy, whichever one suits you, and pick it up. But yeah, it's a really good book, and he dives right into it. It's a very easy read as well, so you can get through it pretty quickly. So make sure you pick it up and then join our book club if you have not already. Encourage you to do that so we can make change here in our nation. Geno, I want to thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And guys, I will see you next week. I believe we'll be live on Saturday. If that changes, because sometimes I have travel or other obligations and things come up, I will definitely let you guys know. Okay. But it will be every week, of course. So thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you for your questions and your comments. I appreciate the stars.